What's going on, guys? Billy here, and yesterday we talked about the DJI Mini 2 as a video shooter's drone, and I was really impressed with the footage. If you guys want, I'll leave a link up in the top right corner, and I'll also put one down in the description so you guys can go ahead and check that out. But as promised, today we're going to be talking about how the Mini 2 fits into a photographer's workflow. So by now, I'm sure you guys are very familiar with the specs of the Mini 2. The 12 megapixel sensor is nothing new, but DJI did add some new shooting modes like auto exposure bracketing and a few other panorama shooting options. The biggest difference though, raw photo shooting capabilities, which is what everyone that owned the original Mavic Mini was practically begging for. I'm going to quickly tease a few images that I posted over on my Instagram, taken of course with the Mini 2 that I did end up editing here, but I wanted to make sure I put these images in this video because I think that they are some of my personal favorite aerial shots that I've ever gotten, and they came from a beginner drone that weighs under 250 grams. That's saying something. If you guys want to go ahead and see more photos taken with the Mini 2, feel free to check out my Instagram. My handle is @BillyKyle, and I'm going to be posting a lot over there in the coming weeks with this drone. So getting back on track here, the first Mavic Mini probably had the simplest, most basic camera that DJI has ever shipped in a drone. It was limited to shooting JPEG files, and I don't think there was any shooting modes to choose from. Maybe if anything, there was like a timed shot shooting mode, but regardless, this drone was limited to single JPEG images, and I still thought it was a great drone despite those limitations for photographers to get their feet wet shooting aerial photos. Now this go around solely because of the ability to shoot raw photos within the Mini 2, and as well as some of the other shooting modes, I think that even veteran photographers and veteran drone flyers are going to get some really good mileage out of the Mini 2. Alright, so moving on here, I figured I would start the slideshow of example images early because I know a lot of you watching are really interested to see what this camera can do. All of these photos here are totally unedited so that you can get an understanding of what these files will look like right off of the camera in that raw format. I can say that I'm definitely happy to see auto exposure bracketing make its way into this drone because the last thing I want to worry about is trying to properly set my exposure while flying a drone. On that tiny phone screen from the lower resolution image being transmitted from the drone, there's just no way that I can get a real feel for what the actual photos will look like exposure wise. Now unfortunately, you don't get a lot of room in the exposure when shooting these brackets, as it'll only shoot one photo at 0.7 over and one photo at 0.7 under, but regardless, it gets the job done most of the time. Okay, so regarding the actual image itself, I think that these are great photos right out of the camera, but I also think that they are a perfect starting place for some serious editing to take place. The colors are there, the contrast is there, the photos are overall sharp, but I feel like right out of the camera they are a little bit washed out, which carries over from what I thought from the photos taken with the first Mavic Mini. Luckily though, with the Mini 2, we have the raw shooting capability to bring back a lot of color to create great looking photos. Speaking of the raw images, I'm going to include a download link in the description so you guys can download all the photos that we looked at here in this video in their raw format, in the DNG format. So you can edit them, you can pixel peep, you can just see how they overall look to see if the Mini 2 is the drone for you, if you're going to be shooting mostly photos with it. I just ask that you don't publish them and use them as your own photos, use them for educational purposes only. So in my previous video, when we were talking about shooting video with the Mini 2, this was the point where we discussed how the attributes of the drone make the shooting experience overall better, but the drone itself really doesn't have to provide you with the bleeding edge of performance to get really good looking aerial images. The video that you shoot with your drone is entirely dependent upon how fast that drone flies, how smooth the drone flies, if you've got a good controller that has responsive sticks, and if you've got a nice clear transmission coming back to your phone screen so that you can view the camera feed with absolutely no interruptions. From there, the list really does go on, and while you don't need those things to shoot great aerial photos, luckily the Mini 2 does deliver that with a great flying drone, a nice solid transmission system coming through OcuSync 2, as well as a pretty fast top speed of 36 miles an hour. I think what you need to know about this drone that is most important to helping you shoot better photos though is that the 3-axis mechanical gimbal is rock solid. It has an increased wind resistance rating, being able to handle winds up to 23.5 miles per hour, and the drone can fly for a respectable amount of time at an advertised 31 minutes. These 3 attributes will make your experience of shooting aerial photos easier, allowing you to fly longer and shoot steadier photos even with higher gusts of wind. So I guess because we're talking about photography with the Mini 2, I should touch on the Panorama. So to take a deeper dive, we've got 3 different shooting options within the Panorama shooting mode. We've got sphere, we've got 180 degrees, as well as wide angle. All of these functions are really fun to use, but I think that the most useful is wide angle. As the name suggests, it almost adds a secondary lens to this camera by stitching together 9 photos to achieve a wider field of view, which I find perfect for sweeping landscapes. Now to circle back around to those example images, if you've taken a chance to pixel peep on those photos, sort of like I have over the past couple of weeks, then you'll probably notice that the finite details get lost in these images because the megapixel count simply isn't high enough. I would say that megapixel count in a drone is super important because your subject that you're shooting is always likely going to be much further away than if you'd be shooting with a traditional camera. Take this photo from Lake George, for example, of this hotel out on an island. It looks stunning when you look at the image as a whole, but when you start to zoom in, the detail just isn't there. That's why I'm really stoked that this drone shoots 4K video, because when I'm flying at these high altitudes, I want to make sure that I can pick up as much detail as I can. Now look, I might be coming down too hard on this drone, especially because of what it is and what price point it's at $449, and especially the size of the drone having to be under 249 grams. And I mean, look at the camera on the front. This thing is so small. It's basically what you find inside of a smartphone, being the sensor size and the megapixel count. And that's the thing. Like on a smartphone, 12 megapixels is totally fine. What you shoot is 5, 10, 15 feet away from you. But when you've got this drone hundreds of feet in the air, 12 megapixels just kind of starts to not cut it. That's why I prefer flying drones with higher resolution cameras, like the 48 megapixel camera on the Mavic Air 2 and the 20 megapixel camera on the Mavic 2 Pro. But now we're starting to compare these higher end drones to something that is in a totally different league. And for that, I think that 12 megapixels is totally fine. And I still think you're going to get some really stunning photos out of this drone, especially to share on social media, right? I mean, that's what this drone is for, shooting photos to share on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. This drone is going to be perfect, and I think it's a really damn good photography drone. Anyway guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. Be sure to let me know what you think of these photos down in the comment section below, and as always, I'll talk to you later. Peace.